The morning light, filtered through the tall, arched windows of her loft, fell in perfect, golden shafts across Elara's studio. At 78, her hands, though marked by time, moved with a familiar grace, guiding a brush loaded with cobalt blue onto a fresh canvas. Her home was not just a house. It was a living gallery of her life's work. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked against the walls. Sculptures of bronze and clay, some finished, some waiting for a final touch, filled the corners. To her, they were not just objects. They were memories, fears, and triumphs given shape and color. Elara's world revolved around her art and her family. Her late brother's son, Leo, and his wife, Clara, were the center of her universe. Young, ambitious artists themselves, they were a constant presence in her life, a beautiful, youthful chaos that she cherished. She had always believed in their talent, often more than they believed in themselves. She paid for their expensive studio loft downtown, bought them the finest oil paints, the most precious pigments. She'd even financed their art-buying trips to far-flung, exotic locales, believing these experiences would fuel their creativity. Her favorite painting, a piece from her early career, hung prominently in her living room. It was called Morning Light, a soft, abstract swirl of yellows, pinks, and golds that captured a single, fleeting moment of hope from a difficult time in her youth. It was not for sale. It was for her. It was a promise she'd made to herself long ago. The first crack in her perfect world came on a warm Thursday afternoon. A young art student, a bright, earnest girl who sometimes helped Elara with her website, came over. "Ms. Vance, I saw something so wild on social media today," she said, her voice full of youthful wonder. "An influencer posted a photo of her living room, and there was a painting that looked just like your morning light. The one you said was the first thing you ever truly loved." Elara laughed it off. "Impossible, my dear. That one isn't going anywhere. It must have been a print." The young girl seemed to accept the answer, but a seed of doubt had been planted in Elara's mind. A few days later, while on a video call with Clara, the seed sprouted into a terrifying, thorny vine. Clara, her perfectly coiffed hair and flawless makeup in sharp focus, was talking excitedly. "Oh my gosh, Elara, you're not going to believe the surprise Leo got me. We're celebrating a huge new sale. It was an unexpected bonus from a gallery deal we just closed." As Clara spoke, she gestured to a gleaming new luxury car parked in their driveway. Elara felt a prick of unease. She ended the call, the silence of her studio suddenly deafening. Her hands, which moments ago were so steady, now trembled. A cold, numbing sensation crept up her arms as she began a frantic search online. She found it in seconds. A high-end art magazine's profile on a private collector. The article's headline read, "$1 million acquisition, the rare morning light by Elara Vance." The photo in the article showed the collector standing proudly in front of the framed painting. It was hers. It was undoubtedly, heartbreakingly, hers. She stared at the image, then at her empty wall where it was supposed to be, and then back at the photo Clara had just sent of the new car. The car was white, the same pristine white as the canvas on which she had painted Morning Light. The betrayal was not in the selling of the painting, it was in the silence, the secrecy, the cold, calculating lie they had woven. Elara's world, a beautiful canvas of family and art, had just been splashed with a single, devastating stroke of black. The next day, Elara went to their studio. The loft was a study in sterile minimalism, a stark contrast to her own home. There was very little art on the walls, and what little there was looked manufactured, not created. Elara didn't have a plan. She only knew she had to see their faces, to look them in the eye and watch their lies crumble. "Oh, Elara, what a surprise," Clara said, her voice a little too bright. "We were just about to head out for brunch. This is our celebratory car, you know. Want to go for a spin?" Elara shook her head, her gaze fixed on Leo. He was bent over a drafting table, but his movements were stiff, unnatural. I want to know about the sale, Elara said, her voice a low, steady hum that demanded attention. The one that paid for the car. Leo looked up, his expression a practiced mix of confusion and irritation. What are you talking about, Elara? A sale. We sell art all the time. Elara walked over to a stack of art magazines, and pulled out the one she'd been carrying. She opened it to the full-page photo of Morning Light, and the $1 million receipt. She laid it on the drafting table. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Leo's face went pale. Clara, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. Look, Elara, we were going to tell you eventually, Clara said, her voice losing its cheerful facade and hardening into a cold, defensive wall. We saw an opportunity. We didn't think you'd mind. You've given us so much. We assumed this was just another one of your gifts. Another gift? Elara's voice was barely audible. That wasn't a gift. It was a promise. It was the only painting I ever told you was not for sale. It meant something to me. It meant a lot of money to us, Leo retorted, his fear turning to a bitter aggression. We used it to get what we deserved. We've been struggling for years, Elara, while you're living in a museum. We only sold what was valuable to special people. The words were a direct, cruel dismissal of Elara's love. They were not special people, they were her children. Broken, Elara left. She felt not just a loss of a painting, but the loss of a family. They saw her not as a mother figure or an artist, but as a bank. She walked for hours, her mind replaying the conversation. The phrase, what was valuable to special people, echoed in her head. She had given them everything, only to learn that her generosity had made them entitled and her love invisible. The next day, she called her gallery owner and friend, Sarah. Sarah arrived immediately, her face etched with a profound sadness. Elara, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. Don't imagine, Sarah, Elara interrupted, her voice gaining a new strength. Help me. They've taken more than a painting. They've been taking for years. Together, they began the painstaking work of documentation. Elara opened her financial records, spreadsheets full of wire transfers for studio rent, receipts for art supplies, that were so expensive they could have paid for a small car, records of credit card payments for business trips, that were nothing more than luxury vacations. The numbers were staggering. She had given them over $500,000 over the years. Sarah's face grew harder with each page. That night, Elara returned to her own canvas. She began to paint with a renewed fury. The colors were dark, somber, with sharp, jarring lines. She painted a canvas with two figures, their backs to the viewer, their hands outstretched. One was holding a sleek car. The other, an empty wallet. This time, she wasn't painting for a feeling. She was painting for the truth. The lawyer arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, his presence a dark cloud in Elara's sun-filled studio. He was a man named Arthur Grant, his suit crisp, his face expressionless. He introduced himself as a family friend, who simply wanted to ensure her well-being. But Elara could see the predator behind the polite smile. She knew what was coming. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, are concerned about your recent behavior, he said, his voice as slick and cold as his polished shoes. He gestured to the canvases piled high in her studio. They believe you are becoming disoriented. This kind of hoarding of art, your emotional volatility, it's a clear sign you're no longer fit to manage your affairs. He presented her with an official document. It was a demand for a power of attorney, a legal request for them to take over her finances and her art collection. The word senile was not on the page, but it hung in the air like a thick, foul odor. My art is not a hoard, Elara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It is my life's work. It is my legacy." She looked him dead in the eye, her gaze a steel-hard challenge. "And my mind is clearer now than it's been in years." She closed the door on him, her heart pounding. The fear was real, but it was quickly replaced by a furious resolve. They weren't just taking her money, they were trying to steal her sanity, her very identity. They wanted to prove she was crazy so they could take everything. Elara immediately called Sarah. Within hours, Sarah had connected her with a renowned specialist in art law and elder abuse, a fierce woman named Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn arrived with a no-nonsense attitude and a stack of legal pads. "They're going to try to paint you as a paranoid, delusional old woman," Evelyn said, flipping through Elara's meticulous records. "But we have something they don't. A mountain of documented evidence. We will prove your mental competence, your financial stability, and most importantly, their years of systemic financial exploitation." The conflict was now out in the open, and Elara was ready. Evelyn's team began building a case, meticulously and methodically, while Leo and Clara, confident in their plan, filed a formal lawsuit for guardianship, believing they had already won. The trial was a battle of narratives, a stark contrast between two different versions of the truth. Leo and Clara, dressed in expensive, somber suits that seemed to scream respectability, sat at the defense table. They whispered to their lawyer, their faces a mask of feigned concern for their ailing aunt. They painted a picture of a frail, confused old woman who was losing her mind and needed their help. Their opening salvo was a vicious assault on Elara's sanity and talent. They presented a crooked art appraiser, a man with a sneering demeanor, who had clearly been paid for his testimony. He dismissed Elara's entire body of work as sentimental, derivative pieces with little to no market value. His voice, dripping with condescension, argued that her hoarding of worthless art was a clear sign of a delusional mind, someone who could no longer distinguish between a priceless artifact and a piece of junk. He was followed by a biased, unqualified therapist who claimed Elara's emotional volatility during her confrontation with her children was a clear symptom of dementia, a person breaking from reality. They concluded their case with a simple, chilling narrative: Elara was a danger to herself, and the court had a duty to protect her from her own instability. But Elara's defense was a masterpiece of its own design, a meticulously planned counter-narrative executed by her sharp lawyer, Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn began by systematically presenting Elara's documentation. The wire transfers, the credit card statements, the bank records, all meticulously dated and organized. The evidence showed over $500,000 had been transferred from Elara to her children over the past 10 years. Evelyn's voice, calm and resolute, presented it not as a mother's loving gifts, but as a pattern of systematic financial abuse. Then came the character witnesses, a procession of Elara's old guard, her true friends. They testified with a passion and conviction that money couldn't buy. One by one, they spoke of Elara's incredible mental acuity, her sharp eye for detail, her brilliant critiques. They spoke of her renewed creative spirit, her incredible new work, which she was painting with a power she hadn't possessed in decades. They spoke of her as a mentor, a genius, a friend, someone who had given so much of herself to the art world, only to have her own family betray her. The emotional climax of the trial came when Elara herself took the stand. She was a vision of quiet strength, dressed simply in a dark, elegant suit, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. She spoke not of their betrayal, but of her art. She described the deep, personal meaning behind her work, the emotions she had poured into each canvas. She spoke of the new painting she had done after the betrayal, the one with the two figures and the wallet. "They say my anger is a sign of dementia," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I ask you, what person with a clear mind would not be angry? My art is not a symptom of a disease. It is the language of my pain, and now, the language of my truth." Her lawyer then produced a copy of the $1 million receipt for Morning Light. The judge, a quiet man who had been observing the proceedings with an intense interest, saw through their lies. The narrative battle had come to a close. The final verdict was delivered with solemn gravity. The judge, a quiet man who had been observing the proceedings with an intense interest, delivered his ruling with a clarity that left no room for doubt. He ruled in Elara's favor, dismissing Leo and Clara's guardianship lawsuit. He declared Elara to be not only mentally competent, but a rightful and competent steward of her own legacy. He publicly condemned Leo and Clara's actions as a clear case of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The courtroom, which had been silent for so long, erupted in a wave of applause from her friends and supporters, and a single, strangled cry from Clara. Elara felt no triumph, only a quiet, profound relief. The legal battle was over, but the emotional wound remained. As the judge's words sank in, she looked directly at a stunned Leo and Clara. Their faces, stripped of their usual arrogance, were pale with shock and disbelief. Her expression was a mix of sorrow for what they had become and a newfound, triumphant peace. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Elara decided she did not want to live in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. It was too filled with the ghosts of her past, of a life she had lived for others. She took a few paintings she truly loved, pieces that held personal meaning and memory. With the help of Sarah, she sold the rest of her vast collection to a museum, using the money to create the Elara Vance Foundation for emerging artists. The foundation would provide grants and scholarships to young artists who couldn't afford to pursue their dreams. It was a final, graceful act of giving, but this time, it was a gift to a community that valued her, not a family that took her for granted. Elara had one final conversation with Leo and Clara, at their insistence. It took place in her lawyer's office, a neutral ground with no room for emotional manipulation. There were no apologies from them, only demands. They still wanted a piece of the foundation's money. Leo, she said, her voice calm. Clara. The lawsuit made me realize something. This wasn't a family. It was a business arrangement. You have systematically taken and taken and taken for years. There is nothing left for you. The money is for a cause I believe in. The art is for a legacy I am proud of. You are on your own now. The story of Elara's life did not end in a courtroom. It began again. She was in her new, small studio, a fresh canvas before her. She was painting for the sheer joy of creation, not for an audience, not for a family, not for money. She was painting for herself, and she was free. The last brushstroke was her own, and it was a stroke of absolute peace. Sparkle's Elara's story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest masterpieces are born from pain, resilience, and truth. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, emotional stories that reveal the hidden battles of life. Like, share, and comment to keep these voices alive. Your support helps us bring more stories of strength and survival to light. White right pointing backhand index. Subscribe now, and never miss the next chapter.